so that everyone. And I will hand over to you, Aggie. But so this session is on African urban and rural tourism, and the session in breakout room 2 for any who might be swapping over is African tourism employment and promotion. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Aggie Wheel, and I am a faculty member at Vancouver Island University on the west coast of Canada, where it is currently 5 a.m. So thank you all for being here this morning. I'm coming to you from the unceded territory of the Senegal First Nation on the beautiful west coast. I just have actually a request of Wadey. It looks like our other participants haven't joined us yet. Are you ready to go now?
Yes, I can.
Excellent, perfect. So we will start then with Wadey Pandy and Christian Rogerson's presentation on nature tourism and climate change risk perception in the Waterwork District Municipality, Limpopo. I will turn it over to you. And please remember, everyone, to stay muted and to put your questions in the chat.
Okay. Let me just quickly do this. And can everybody see my slides?
They are not currently shared. No.
Oh, sure, but okay. I was under the impression that I shared them. Hold on. Let's try that again. Share screen. And
perfect. We can see them now.
okay. Perfect. Ah, fantastic. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Wade Pandy, and today I'm going to be talking about nature tourism and climate change risk perception in the Waterwork District of Limpopo, South Africa. The order of this presentation is that I'm basically going to introduce the topic. Thereafter, I'll discuss some of the key literature and present an outline of the methods that we used in the study before moving on to unpack the results and conclude. The importance of nature-based tourism is increasingly recognized for providing a significant range of benefits, and such benefits might be social, psychological. A study recently published in the Journal of Tourism Recreational Research showed that nature tourism can provide psychological rescue and rehabilitation at levels comparable to clinical counseling for women who have suffered trauma, abuse, injury, or illness, a finding which underlies how beneficial nature tourism can be. In discussing the financial benefits, Winter et al. Estimate that nature tourism worldwide may generate as much as 8 billion visits per year and account for $600 billion in spending. In saying that, it's then highly important to point out that the segment of nature tourism is consistently recognized as one of the most vulnerable areas of the product effects of climate change. And this is because climate change is able to exert significant levels of pressure on the natural environment and on key elements of a locality's overall biodiversity, both directly and indirectly. To date, the most detailed baseline assessment of the impact of climate change on South Africa's tourism economy is a report that was produced by Golder and Associates on behalf of the South African Department of Tourism. I won't go into too much detail, but the report specifically looks at the climate change related impacts and risk factors facing tourism in South Africa and presents a sizable number of risks and issues of concern. This includes significant biodiversity loss, permanent shifts in tourism consumption patterns away from inland areas towards the country's coastal zones, an increase in the stress placed on key types of tourism infrastructure, and increased likelihood of localized flooding events. What was very, very significant is also that in discussing the potential impacts associated with climate change on the tourism industry with a variety of the country's tourism stakeholders, the report also highlighted that the majority of private tourism operators as of 2011 had had limited to no engagement with the issue of climate change. In exploring the scientific roots of climate change research, Fleming in 1999 suggests that the earliest research on the topic dates back more than 200 years. However, it wasn't until the period of the 1950s and 1960s when advancements in technology made it possible and indeed actually practical to conduct accurate climate recording, modeling, forecasting, and reporting of climate data. Over this period, the climate change phenomena was increasingly identified as an issue of growing concern for researchers involved in the hard sciences. However, early attempts to raise public and political awareness were initially ignored until the late 1980s. On the 23rd of June 1988, James Henson, though, NASA director and climate modeler, gave evidence before the hearings of the US Senate's Energy and Natural Resource Committee over the existence of global warming. What made this so interesting is at the same time, the American Midwest was experiencing an intense heat wave, which was accompanied by widespread drought that saw as many as 10,000 heat-related deaths. So a lot of people suddenly took note of what was going on, and it unlocked a great range of concern and political mobilization that very quickly led to the development of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in the same year. So almost 40 years, there was nobody interested in the topic, and suddenly the topic really took off. In the build-up to the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development in 1992, policymakers suggested that localized studies be conducted examining the general public's perceptions. And that was so that they could produce decent policy that was understandable, but also policy that they thought the general public would get behind. And this call for research on local perceptions triggered a whole range of studies. Although unfortunately in tourism, those studies were very much out of the mainstream, with the exception of works by people like Kempton and Berstrom and Reed. The climate change issue would eventually reach the point of mainstream interest by a range of tourism researchers by the 2000s, with a number of them increasingly recognizing the importance of perceptions research in efforts to bridge the seemingly significant disconnect that appeared to exist between climate change experts, policymakers, and industry stakeholders. And some of the literature that I've put up here is just an example of those key findings all over the world. In terms of the methodology of my study, the material presented forms part of a broader investigation examining local tourism business perceptions of adaptation to climate change in South Africa across different sectors of tourism and between different tourism-dependent localities. The methodology used attempted to build on the work of Ruhanan and Shakila in Australia, where research was undertaken to explore the perceptions of key tourism stakeholders and their understanding of climate change as a phenomenon. The research undertaken really had 5 main phases of work. The first was to collect and evaluate key national and international literature, then examine local, district, and metropolitan data in order to highlight key tourism-dependent economies in South Africa. This was something that Rogerson started in 2017 and that I picked up on and carried on. The establishment of a contact database containing the details of prospective tourism businesses that we could potentially look to survey, and then undertaking of semi-structured interviews before analyzing and discussing the findings. There were 2 main reasons why the Waterwork was really chosen as a site. And that was because Rogerson in 2017 had identified the Waterberg as one of the 10 biggest international destinations in South Africa, one of the 10 most important in the country. And the second was that the leisure tourism economy of the Waterberg is primarily anchored upon the natural environment here. So it was a wonderful opportunity to check how businesses understood their vulnerability when they had so much at stake because they relied so much on the natural environment and tourism. In looking at the table, which seeks to capture the number of domestic and international trips that are provided, it quickly becomes apparent how significantly tourism has grown between 2001 and 2012, which is a key factor that informed the choice of this as a location. In coming to the results of my research, it's important to note that all 32 interviewees acknowledged that they had indeed heard of climate change from sources which included television, radio, newspaper articles, and in some instances, even community forums. There was disclosed a considerable amount of variation in the extent to which tourism stakeholders were able to articulate the phenomenon, but the basic explanation of the phenomenon always involved the idea of the manner in which the world is just getting hotter. That climate change just means the world's heating up. In looking at the perceived impacts of climate change, 2 distinct types of interviewees could actually be found if we broke down the data. And that was groups of people climate change is representing any kind of themselves or business, and those that see themselves as having was that climate change wouldn't be much, but they didn't think it would have an impact. The Waterwork has its own microclimate as opposed to the surrounding areas, so the rest of the country might be in trouble, but the Waterwork will be fine. And that's a common fallacy that we see in a lot of research. And my personal favorite is nothing more than an American hoax created to spread fear. In looking at sorry, everybody. As I'm back, my internet seems to have dropped.
Yeah, the last little bit's been a little choppy on my end. We're still missing one presenter. So if you wanted to come back in, if you think your internet will hold and finish your presentation, we have the time.
I would love to.
Okay.
Okay, I would really love to. Let me quickly just carry on screen sharing.
Oh.
Okay. I don't know where I lost everybody. Sorry, I was talking to the abyss.
After this slide.
Update. Oh, I seem to have lost. After the slide. Okay, I'm very sorry, but my computer has now suddenly decided. Oh, there we go. Right. In moving on, it would depend on moving on to the idea of people that didn't think it would have an impact. There was a wide variety of perceptions. As opposed to the 34 plus people, percent of the people that we surveyed that didn't think that climate change either existed or would have any impact on them, we actually found that 65, roughly almost 66% of all the people, there's a wide variety of perception about how that impact would work. And so we saw quotes that came out from people like, it would really depend on how the climate changes and we'd maybe see where we'll go. So a lot of people sitting on the fence, but still concerned. People sort of, yes, climate change is very real, but there's not really been a big enough change yet to worry. We'll deal with that in the long term. And then there were other people who were in areas of high exposure who they saw things as global warming and climate change being about. In looking at this table, what we try to do is just map independent risk perceptions. So perceptions that moved away from just the climate change issue and just asking people that lived in these areas, in these very natural areas, if there were risks that they were worried about. And the overwhelming majority of the people that we interviewed all cited that they had risks. Where some people felt less insecure was that they lived in sort of urban, like smaller urban agglomerations, as opposed to sort of in the bush. But most people in the bush saw themselves at high risk. And without doubt, fire was the big issue. As one person quipped, fighting fires is basically our winter sport. It was a major worry for all people. But what made the findings of this research so interesting was that out of everybody that saw climate change, well, that saw independent risks as fire, floods, drought, lightning, and no basically what we discovered. What we discovered was that only one interviewee actually saw themselves as potentially being at risk, which was quite amazing. So in just concluding, overall the findings really reveal a significant disconnect between the majority of interviewees' recognition of the term climate change and their understanding of the direct and indirect impacts that are associated with climate change, and that it really must be reiterated that in this area, more than 1/3 of the respondents stated that they did not believe climate change will have any kind of impact on tourism in the Waterberg, which is very astounding that we've had decades of education and work that's gone into sort of raising the issue. Population in some areas that actually don't even believe it exists or will affect them. And most stakeholders have assumed a wait-and-see approach until the impacts associated with climate change become more pronounced. before they're even willing to consider action. In the meantime, stakeholders are focused themselves on a range of more immediate threats, like fire and flooding. All right, that's me.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Dr. Pandy, and just a reminder that we'll be holding all the questions till the very end. Gustav, it appears that you're now with us. So Gustav Visser, spatial mismatch between cities and heritage tourism sites in sub-Saharan Africa. Are you ready to start presenting? Perfect.
Okay, guys, hi there, good to see you. We've had major problems here at Stellenbosch with our electricity, and I had to move to Jan's office because the generator for the building is on my side of the building. And if you see my picture looking quite old, it's not the teaching here that's doing that to me. It's Serton, the guy who started geography here at Stellenbosch, and Jan put that in place of a photo of his family. So, okay. I'm going to speak to a topic that came to me more in the form of a commission piece of work by Dallin Timothy for a book that is coming out in April concerning heritage, culture, and tourism in Africa. And he asked me to speak to the idea that cities were major ports of entry to important heritage sites. And it made me think a lot about that, and got to a conclusion that might be a bit controversial. Now, I think we all know that cities are, where it's at when it gets to tourism, although we don't necessarily think of that in the African context. Quite often we think through the lens of northern visitors and think of parks and that type of heritage, but in fact, urban tourism is what is very important for us. I think what is important here too is that our gateways are in fact not in any real way related to big heritage. So what I did was say, okay, fine, let's have a look in my own backyard. Now, to say that a place doesn't have heritage would be absolute nonsense. It's heritage through the lens of UNESCO. And it opens up all sorts of questions concerning whether or not UNESCO is necessarily the place to kind of like arbitrarily quite often decide what constitutes heritage and world heritage in particular. And I think in thinking through how it is we deploy heritage here, we need to perhaps be a bit more aggressive in saying that we don't need to have your approval to use heritage tourism in the sense that we have world heritage sites. So I think we need to rethink who can lay claim to it. So basically what I'm going to do here is a literature review in many ways, and just thinking slightly differently about that literature and how it's constituted and who participates, etc., etc. Okay, so here is the first, thing we can all say to one another is that we bandy this word heritage around very often, but it's extremely vexed. And I don't think that there's really universal consensus of what concerns it, and particularly if we look through at it through the lens of Africa. I think also a very big annoying thing to me, I think for many Southern scholars and Southern tourism operators is what is international significant cultural or natural heritage? Who's the arbitrator of that? And I think that we have not really got to a point where we have a decent answer to it. And I also think something that is particularly problematic for Sub-Saharan African destinations is that there is not this major emphasis on the material, but rather the non-material heritage. But that in itself is extremely difficult in packaging and presenting to tourists. And I'll get back to that point at a later stage. I think from a numbers point of view, we can tell each other that Africa, in fact, has very few sites, just over 100. I think it was 111 at a stage. and it's very unevenly distributed. Here is kind of like the idea of cultural heritage versus natural heritage, and then mixed sites. We have 55 of the one, 54 of the other, and then mixed sites. And then where we first started with Ethiopia and Senegal. So this is the map I want you to have a close look at. The little stars is where the national capital. So for most cases, the national capital is also going to be the main port of entry for international tourists that we quite often want to attract. And what I want you to realize is how totally out of sync those sites are relative to the actual port of entry. I also want you to notice, and I saw that's on the next slide, so I'm just going to speak to the map here. You're also going to notice that these sites are very, very dispersed. So the idea of that you can theme becomes very difficult in the sense that you can look at West Africa and say, okay, fine, let's deal with the slave heritage. But it is in an area very, very far from one another, and it's totally away from the access points. And that repeats itself basically throughout the continent. And of course, the important thing is that in the middle of the continent, there's not much going on according to UNESCO, but let's just underline that, according to UNESCO. What else can we say? So yes, what is it that we celebrate? The physical parts is what we are celebrating in many ways. So this would be our northern parts of the Greco-Roman, and then Islam, and then the history of Christianity in Ethiopia, and then of course the slave ports of exit in East and West Africa. I think there's something that is problematic about when we think of some of even the UNESCO heritage sites in some of these countries is that quite often the heritage constitutes something that is a style of building rather than the physical thing in itself, and heritage as living, not heritage as static. I think that needs to be included in these definitions. I have made the point concerning the sheer size and scale, and I think that is something we need to keep in mind when we think of tourism as a developmental tool. And then what I did for this particular chapter was just go and have a look at what the Rogersons had to say and about some general remarks concerning African tourism scholarship. And I have sent to the organizers a copy of the text, so you can find it there for the whole chapter that I did. Okay. Now, the interesting thing is that actually, if we look at tourism scholarship, generally, we don't have that much relative to other regions. We tend to not publish in tourism journals, but in geography journals quite often. It's mostly English speaking. The number of participants is very limited. And this is important in terms of what type of discourses are in fact out there. And if you kind of like draw on the work of Mike Hall, you'll find that it's very dense, closed loops of associated academics. So we tend to write about the same thing and talk about the thing in the same manner. Of course, we always ignore the Francophone literature to our own, that we could get lots and lots more out of them than we do. But yeah, okay. That is what I wanted to say about that. Then when viewing this, what I want to make clear from all the literature on tourism in sub-Saharan Africa is that, in fact, the density of talking about heritage tourism in the region is actually not that much. The focus is on very different types of stuff than heritage in itself. And that, I think, means that there's also investigatory kind of like gap for us to fill in terms of this high level heritage. Okay, I just want you to be clear on this. I see that Ronnie is in the room as well, and he could kill me if I said there wasn't loads and loads of heritage that we can put together. It's not that I'm referring to. I'm looking at the World Heritage sites that are apparently internationally very important. Okay, so when it gets to the urban, your points of entry, I think interesting thing, and reading this against a post-colonial frame, is that in fact that type of heritage, when it gets to the built heritage, tends to be colonial, and that is quite problematic, because you're actually keeping something alive and selling that appeals to a very different era. And South Africa certainly has a lot of examples, just it's in general heritage, that we in fact are preserving things that politically actually sits uncomfortably with the mores of the time. What else? Okay, we've already connected up with this whole Western conception by supranational institutions like UNESCO, but they're not the only people around. I mean, you can think of a variety of tourism organizations that in the end, the script is written in the West, quite often in Europe. The whole notion of fluidity of heritage versus static heritage. Okay, so let's wrap this up. Okay, so in contrast with Europe, heritage tourism as a site of investigation actually does not register in any force. It sounds bad, but in fact it means that there's a lot of intellectual space for us to move in, and a space that we can actually try and reshape to have something more of a post-colonial voice and speaking back to the North. I think that there is, we've not reached our full potential in terms of heritage tourism research. Then I think the big issue here, and this goes forward for policy, this goes forward for tourism planning, is if we're going to use big sites, then heritage tourism is going to be problematic, because they are not located, and whether it's cultural, whether it's natural, they're not located anywhere close to your city gateways. And that requires very clever planning, which I don't think we have the resources of, how it is you string together other forms of heritage, et cetera, to get these people to move. Quite often, I mean, some places 200-300 kilometers away from actually the port of entry. Yep. And I think where we have seen, world heritage in the urban, quite often those developments have become islands for international tourists and not for locals. And that goes for the natural heritage as well. I think it's a long running debate about, you know, for whom is this heritage being you know, looked after.
Mustafa, I hate to interrupt, but we are rapidly running out of time and still have
okay,
three presenters.
I'm going to leave it just at that. What I'm going to say is that we need to focus on the local non-tangible and not just on the monumental if we deal with heritage tourism in Africa. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Lots of parallels there with some of the heritage stuff that we see here in Canada. Okay, our next presenter is Ruan Henning. Hashtag love Cape Town, an African urban tourism model. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Hey. Are you seeing my PowerPoint slides?
It says that you've shared, but it's a black screen.
Oh, no. Okay. Sorry. Let's just quickly.
I think, are you seeing it's still a black screen. I think,
Yeah.
Are you seeing my slides and you're on mute, or the two phrases that I will be done with once this pandemic is over?
Oh no, it keeps on doing it. I wonder what's going on. Okay, let's try this. Sorry, guys. Ah, there we go.
There you go. Perfect.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Atlas Africa, for affording me the opportunity to present my paper, #Love Cape Town, an African Urban Tourism Model. I'm Roan Henang, and I'm currently completing my master's degree in Heritage and Cultural Tourism at the University of Pretoria, in which I'm focusing on urban tourism development in South African cities. Today, I will be discussing the role urban tourism has on tourism development in the city of Cape Town and how it has integrated its various tourism sectors into an urban tourism product. However, the core focus of this discussion will, however, be focused on Cape Town tourism model and its adaptability and transference to other African cities. So the urban environment has always been with human civilization since the days of Mesopotamia and Sumeria, and has been amongst the most significant tourism destinations ever since. And people have always been drawn to these cities, traveling to experience an array of cultural and historical events and attractions. People, or the urban environment is influenced by its past and its present and its interaction with people. So we see that urban tourism has become an important sector within the global tourism industry, as it is able to serve a range of tourists, becoming increasingly recognized as an integral part of the tourist experience. The quality of the urban tourism product, therefore, obviously determines the city's ability to participate in the fierce competition in the global economy and economic development and continued investment. So in the South African context, the development and the promotion of its cities as a major urban tourism destination has encouraged continuous investment and continued tourism development. The most notable example thereof is the city of Cape Town, which is the southernmost city in South Africa and is considered one of the oldest cities in South Africa and one of the most historically important cities in Southern Africa. Its historical construction and processes have extensively influenced on shaping the city, its tourist sites, and its tourism industry. Cape Town's uniqueness is therefore determined by its heritage and cultural and natural resources. The city has a variety of tourism sectors that forms part of its urban environment, which obviously then includes heritage and cultural tourism sites such as the Boer Kaap or Robben Island, leisure and recreational tourism sites such as the various beaches in and around the city, and shopping tourism like the V&A waterfront. Then we also have ecotourism sites such as Boulders Beach and Kirstenbosch Botanical Gardens. We also have seen that Cape Town has business tourism industries such as the Cape Town International Convention Center and various other business tourism offerings. So the city of Cape Town's success as an African urban tourism destination is largely attributed towards the public-private partnership between the city of Cape Town and Cape Town Tourism. The city of Cape Town obviously then manages the mandate through its tourism department, and Cape Town Tourism is the city's official marketing organization. So we see that the city of Cape Town's mandate is to drive and manage destination planning and policy making, tourism regulation, providing tourism infrastructure and services, training capacity and building, and then tourism product development. Then what we see is that the city has developed strong policies for tourism development in which it paves the way for job creation, economic growth, and continued development within the city. And the city's vision is to turn Cape Town into a world-class competitor and South Africa's prestige tourism destination. And through their collaborative approach to policy development with local communities and industry stakeholders, the city has developed its newly Cape Town Tourism Development Framework in 2024. This policy framework has developed strategic goals, such as it ensures visitor comfort, improve and diversify tourism products, organizing effective growth, stimulating demand through specifically brand and reputation management. And this is particularly driven by Cape Town Tourism's public-private partnership with Cape Town Tourism. Then what we see is that Capetown Tourism, being the city's official marketing organization, in which its mandate includes tourism marketing, where Capetown Tourism focuses on providing services and Capetown's iconic attractions. And additionally, it promotes less explored sites in and around the city to both domestic and international travelers. It also has its industry services, where Capetown Tourism serves over 1,300 tourism businesses and provides them with accreditation, brochure displays at its visitor centers, networking sessions, and making tourism industry ultimately more inclusive. Lastly, we also see that it has its visitor services, which include Capetown Tourism's 6 visitor information centers, all situated at strategic locations throughout the city. And these visitor centers offer visitors local and regional information and obviously booking services. And the visitor centers also then provide a range of products such as brochures, city maps, local crafts, and postcards. In this partnership, the City of Cape Town then funds Capetown Tourism, which then enables Capetown Tourism to fulfill its mandate of tourism marketing and providing industry services and visitor services. In return, Capetown Tourism then promotes or markets the City of Cape Town as a must-see and must-experience African urban tourism destination. This public-private partnership is ultimately regarded as a best practice example by many international tourism leaders, and the success thereof is evident in the fact that the United Nations World Tourism Organization invited Capetown Tourism to serve on its Destination Business Council and present this tourism model at its general annual meeting in 2018 and 2019. Additionally, what we see is that Cape Town also has been selected as one of 15 top global destinations as an ideal subject for a case study by the United Nations and the World Tourism Cities Foundation. This highlights the city's global status as an urban tourism destination that has the potential to influence global and world travel. The City of Cape Town and Capetown Tourism therefore adopted their Love Cape Town as its destination branding, which combines the city's attractions, local communities, and its people to form a unique connection with visitors to the city. The goal thereof is to encourage an authentic and immersive holiday experience, and the strategy was developed around the hashtag Love Cape Town. And the goal is to encourage Cape Town visitors and residents to the city to create and share content about their experience on social media, ultimately then providing visitors with peer-to-peer information about their experiences to the attractions and other events throughout the city. This campaign was ultimately seen as a success as it had encouraged visitors to engage with the hashtag, and which saw the Cape Town Tourism getting 545,000 Facebook likes, 164,000 Twitter followers, and 105 Instagram followers. Through this, Cape Town is able to attract investment, create job opportunities, grow its economy, and further develop its tourism industries. However, this model is designed to attract travelers from the global north. This is predominantly motivated by the fact that travelers generally come from Germany, the United Kingdom, the United States of America, France, and the Netherlands. And additionally, what we can see is that this public-private partnership can also face disagreements in the approach to certain problems and issues that the city may face within its tourism sector, as both usually generally have various viewpoints and goals as to deal with these issues. And lastly, what we see is financial constraints can also hinder the success of this private-public partnership, especially during a time like now when we are faced with a global pandemic. But the adaptability and the transference of this model could be used as an inspiration for urban tourism development in other African cities, such as Dar es Salaam, Harare, Lagos, and Nairobi. And this is motivated by these cities' heritage and cultural composition, leisure and recreational attractions, access to ecotourism experiences, and business offerings. For example, Nairobi's ability to offer unique ecotourism experiences, Lagos's ability to serve the business traveler, and Zanzibar's ability to attract the leisure traveler. These cities are therefore proficient in their ability to attract travelers from all walks of life to experience their unique tourism offerings. And I would just like to thank you all again. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for staying on time. Our next presenter is Amim, presenting on Algeria's tourism development plan, initial prospects and current circumstances. And can I please remind everyone to remain muted if you are not one of the speakers. Kevin, I can see right now that your phone is not muted. So if you could please mute that. Okay. Perfect. We can see your slides. But you're still muted.
I'm so sorry for that. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all doing well. My name is Iman El Azawi. I'm a PhD student at the University of the West of Scotland in the UK. And today I will be presenting with you a small glimpse of a case study that I have developed with my supervisors, which I will be covering Algeria's tourism development plan, initial prospects, and the current circumstances. Come on. Okay, so today's presentation will mainly cover Algeria and its location and history. We will go also through the strategy, the tourism strategy that was launched, the challenges that this tourism development plan has been facing, and the results. So Algeria is a North African country. It's in fact the largest country in Africa, covering an area of 2.5 million square kilometers, out of which 2 million square kilometers is purely desert. And it also has 1,600 kilometers of Mediterranean coastline. And it is also located in the north between Tunisia and Morocco and facing the European continent. With its vast area, it is surely rich of cultural and natural diversity. And it also has 7 UNESCO heritage sites that are spread across the country. So historically speaking, Algeria witnessed different waves of settlers and invaders throughout history, mainly Romans, Byzantines, Ottomans, Arabs, and lastly, the French Empire that stayed in Algeria for 132 years. And also the country faced 10 years of civil war. So with this long history of wars and brutality, it was really necessary to establish a nation branding strategy to develop the nation. So in 2008, the Tourism Ministry of Algeria launched a tourism development plan called Horizon 2025. It was part of the government's diversification strategy that was introduced to include profound reforms to various sectors, including tourism. So the Horizon 2025 was mainly focusing on the infrastructure development, mainly accommodation, transportation, leisure centers, and so on and so forth. However, this tourism development plan has faced numerous challenges. The first challenge that this plan has faced was the political instability that has happened since 2019. So since 2019, people have started protesting against the political ruling power and demanding more democracy and freedom. So safety was a concern for international travelers. Another challenge was the administrative corruption that was hindering foreign and local investors and businessmen to invest in the private and public sectors. And lastly, the global pandemic of COVID-19 and the international travel disruption. However, domestic tourism market has grew, even though these challenges were making it really difficult to reach the nation branding strategy's initial aims. But the domestic tourism has grown, and that was mainly because Algeria has established a policy since the start of the pandemic where all, how do we say it? Borders were mainly closed for about 18 months. So Algerians couldn't travel internationally as they used to in the past. And they only had one option, which is traveling locally. And on the other side, people started documenting their journeys to domestic destinations and led to improving the electronic word of mouth and influencing more people to travel. So as a result, the tourism ministry has noticed that the domestic market is growing. So they started focusing on the domestic tourist interest. And by that, they began developing infrastructure projects like hotels. And also they began modernization and expanding the airports and creating new routes domestically to facilitate the mobility for Algerian travelers. So if we look back at the Horizon 2025 initial goals, in 2015, they did an evaluation to see if their goals has been reached or not. And as you can see in the table, their goals were not reached. So in 2008, they aimed at reaching 2.5 million inbound tourists by 2015. However, the results did not reflect that, and only 1.71 million inbound tourists arrived to Algeria. And that's the same for beds, the contribution to the GDP, the contribution to the economy, and the creation of direct and indirect jobs. But still, so far, they are still working on developing the nation branding strategy, and they are also trying to implement new goals that fits with today's circumstances. So I hope I was quick, and thank you so much for listening.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. It's always great when you gain a few minutes, particularly when you're running out of time. So thank you very much for your presentation. Our final presentation of today is by Patricia, and it's on destination narrative in a pandemic, comparing social media posts for Kenyan and Tanzanian tourism boards. And we're sort of running a little bit over time, but it sounds like the other session is as well. So we will have time for probably 1 or 2 questions. But if our presenters wouldn't mind sharing their email addresses, and totally personal choice, we can reach out to everyone afterwards. Trish, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon to people that it's afternoon now, because for us it's 5 a.m. in the morning. And today I'll be presenting on the managing destination narratives in a pandemic, comparing the social media posts of Kenyan and Tanzania Tourism Board. To start with, we all know that tourism has a major significance in the global economy, but mostly when we talk of African countries, it's one of the sectors that has contributed a lot to the development of different countries from one stage of the economy to the next. But talking of the bigger picture of the reason why I did this research, I am a proud Tanzanian. That's to start with. So the fact that sometimes the Kenyans tend to use Mount Kilimanjaro as part of their tourism product a little bit irritates some of the Tanzanians, not only me, but many others. So that was one of the factors that drew me to do this kind of research. So in general, we're going to, I focused on the comparison of the destination narrative that was created and managed by Kenya Tourism Board and Tanzania Tourism Board during the 2.5 months prior to the pandemic and the first 6.5 months of the COVID pandemic, with the use of social media as the primary and immediate communication channel used during the crisis. So one of the big findings that was found in the research was that in Tanzania, where TTB is one of the major or the national destination, DMO as a supplier of the tourism products, most of its narrative was not controlled by the DMO. Rather, apart from that, is that other factors were used as the controllers of the narratives of that destination. We can see that USA also, as one of the major sources of tourism or tourists in Tanzania, kept a travel advisory on all visitors visiting Tanzania, something that was unlike in Kenya. We can also see that the World Health Organization and other news medias were all talking or advising people not to go to Tanzania based on how the COVID-19 situation was handled in that destination, a factor that was unlike for Kenya. Looking at the study context, Kenya and Tanzania are the two destinations which have almost similar type of tourism product, which is highly based on wildlife tourism. And we see that tourism in these both destinations contributes a lot to the national GDP, whereby in Kenya, tourism contributes almost 8.8% of the GDP, while in Tanzania, it contributes 11.7 GDP. When we also look at the number of tourists that were recorded in 2019, is that Kenya had 2 million tourists going to that destination, while Tanzania had 1.5 tourists going to that destinations. Those numbers tend to differ due to other factors like the level of advertisement, safety, and other factors that tourists consider before going or visiting any destination. So in this study, which I divided the work into 4 specific periods, which helped me to analyze what kind of narrative was portrayed there. So the first category or time period I had was the pre-pandemic period, which was basically from December to March 11th, before the pandemic happened. In here, we see that Kenya's narrative and Tanzania narrative was more likely the same because they were both focused on advertising their destination with the kind of tourism products that they have. Kenya basically focused showing the world that it is a destination for adventure, nature-based safari tourism, offering the highest quality experiences and unique value for every type of visitor, which they're basically focused on the new way of advertising tourism, which is more experiential based. While in Tanzania, it focused on showing that Tanzania is a modern, legitimate, and well-developed player on the international tourism stage, who possesses a diverse mix of unique, high-value offerings and offers these products and services with the comfort of the modern convenience. And here we see that Tanzania is still advertising tourism as the old way of product-based rather than experience-based. Then during the pandemic, we also had 3 different time periods, which had the early days of the pandemic, which was basically from the 12th of March to the 31st of March, which was a very short period of time. In this short period of time, Kenya and Tanzania also had different narratives because that was the period which was considered as the start of the pandemic, or where the pandemic, everybody had a panic about. So Kenya's narrative was more focused on safety, caring, and responsible destination with many attractions to be excited about for the future. While Tanzania's narrative was more based on responsible, limited travel, a call to serve tourism industry, as well as a unique level of access to incomparable nature phenomena. In this period of time, we see that both destinations were highly focused on the safety of the people, and they were all talking of the same kind of message concerning COVID-19, but also they were still touching or reminding the tourists that both destinations still have many things for people to be excited about. Then during the preparing for reopening period, which in Kenya, it was from 1st of April to 30th of June in 2020, their messaging was, or their narrative was highly based on the relevance of tourism to everybody, the pride of the country it has in its industry, and the hope the country retains its future. That means at this time, they were still trying to show the people that, yes, they do care, they are sending positive message, but also at the same time, they are still taking COVID-19 as a very serious problem. While in Tanzania, the preparing for the opening period was very short, which was from the 1st of April to 20th of May in 2020. And the message was highly focused on countries' awareness of the richness it possesses, bound by external restriction, and urgently awaiting the return of tourism as their key economic driver. Then in the last time period, which was the reopening phase, where every country was now welcoming back tourists to their destination, despite the fact that we were still in a pandemic, Kenya's time period was from 1st of July to 30th of the 1st of July as the start period of the reopening, although the data ended to 30th of September, days where we analyzed our data. And the messaging was that it was designed to call its citizens to support the rebirth of tourism industry while assuring the safety to the rest of the world. In this time period, Kenya took different stages in the reopening part, where they started opening locally, regionally, then they allowed people to move around its own country before they gave a chance for international visitors to come into their country. While in Tanzania, the reopening phase or the reopening time period was from 21st of May to 30th of September, where we see during that period of time when they opened, most of the destinations or most of the source countries were still closed as they had big concerns of COVID. And the message during this time period was that the country is ready to safely welcome tourism back into its country and offers incredible value to tourists and visitors who travel there. So apart from them having different kind of messaging, they also had different number of postings that appeared. So the data was analyzed. We considered posting Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, and each destination had different type of posting, and they also had different quantity in terms of posting. When you consider in terms of ratios, you can say that Tanzania only had an amount of 21.4% of all Kenya's posts. That means you see here, Kenya was highly focused on its type of messaging, and it was always consistent, trying to show people that COVID is a real serious problem, but they're taking care of it by following all the necessary safety protocols. But also at the same time, they were trying to advertise the tourism product and experiences that can be offered by the destination. While in Tanzania, they still, yes, they showed the importance of COVID and safety at a certain range of time, then later they abandoned the message of safety and protocols concerning COVID, and they were highly focused on the tourism products that they offer as a destination. So in general, we can say that the type of message or narrative that was shared by both DMOs was highly influenced by the perspective of leadership that was provided by the leaders of those two destinations. Whereas in Kenya, the leaders were really focused on showing the world, but also taking care of their society by putting restrictions that enabled their people to be safe. So Kenya was really managing the narrative well through the social media posts, just by the view of the narrative that they had, but also the number of postings that they had in general. This emphasis of their narrative was also compatible with the messaging that other regions were portraying or other regions were sharing about COVID and other things. Then when you come to Tanzania, the Tanzania Tourism Board, or the TTB, had a limited control and influence on their destination narrative, relying on other government agencies such as TANAPA and other tourism providers and public media and etc. to provide their narrative instead of the national DMO as TTB. This can be witnessed by the less number of posts on social media as it was seen, but also this narrative was also highly carried or was influenced by the perspective of leaders that they had about COVID. That's why we see in the reopening phase, Tanzania opened a little bit earlier compared to other destinations in terms of allowing international visitors back into their country. And also when they reopened, they did not portray a clear way in which they opened. They just went international instead of opening slowly so as to monitor how the situation goes. So in conclusion, we can say that KTB had a stronger digital presence than TTB, pertaining the creation and management of the destination narratives during the COVID-19 pandemic. This factor may well have an effect on the consumer travel decision to Kenya or Tanzania in the near future. So DMOs have a role to play in mitigating impact of a crisis on a destination image and reputation. As we all know now that most of the travelers are now looking at several factors before going to any destination, things like safety and many other things. But with the COVID-19 pandemic, which is a worldwide problem, most of the visitors are now looking at which countries are most safe for them to go, despite people being vaccinated and many other things. So KTB has a specific messaging related to mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. And TTB's messaging was only related to more of response and recovery. That's where we saw that the nature of the product, they only advertised the product they offered rather than having the bigger concern of combining the nature of the product that they have and the greater concern of COVID-19. So as a general recommendation, I recommended that Tanzania Tourism Board as the national DMO should invest more on social media strategies in the creation of the narrative, as we all know that social media is one of the cheapest way of advertising or sharing messages, which any destination or any business can take compared to other means which are a little bit expensive. And also they should have a general plan on the crisis management and communication before the crisis happen. Or know that we know that crises are always unfortunate situations that happen, but it's always nice as a destination to have some plan on how to mitigate near or future crisis in order to maintain profit in their destinations. And to Kenya Tourism Board, my general recommendation was that they should maintain the good work of presenting Kenya as one of the good destinations in East Africa. Thank you so much, asanteni sana. And for people that would be interested to go and look at my research, I've kept a link at the end. And also, if you want to look at my defense, the link is also provided at the end. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Trish. I haven't seen any questions come up, but we are rapidly running out of time. Trish, if you could stop sharing your screen, that would be great. I want everyone to join me in congratulating and thanking our presenters for this morning for the wonderful presentation. So if you want to maybe turn your cameras on and give a round of applause. Thank you very much to all of our presenters for this session this morning. Tara, any housekeeping announcements that you would like to share?
No, thank you. Thank you very much for chairing the session. Thank you very much for getting up so early to chair the session. Thanks to everyone for coming in. We're going to start the next session at 5:10. So maybe this is actually a great time because people have been here for a little while to just do a quick stand up and stretch and quick move around. So we will start back in 4 minutes for the next session. And Nina, I can't see if you're here yet, but we will organize getting you sorted. So thanks again, Aggie. Really great to see you. And we'll see everybody in just a few minutes. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a wonderful day.